Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to start you off with some radar data this morning. We're using the radar out of Tallahassee in Florida. What you're watching here is the landfall of Hurricane Idalia. It is a Category 4 strength hurricane with winds measured at 130 miles an hour. And the heaviest rain and the strongest banding seems to be on the northern side of this, which is going to be important in a few moments when we look at where the greatest flooding threat is going to be. Some of the outside bands here that have moved through Florida, many of these individual storm cells have been warned for tornadoes. Remember, the eastern and northeastern quadrant of hurricanes are capable of producing supercell-like behavior in the banding of those storms, and as a result, they tend to rotate and produce tornadoes themselves. But what you've got here is the eye wall right here, about to make landfall just as I'm recording this. It's about 6:35 in the morning Central Time here. Now, one of the things I want to show you about this particular tool called Radar Scope is that you have access in this to the radial velocity imagery. So I'm going to click on that just to show you this style of imagery. And let's go ahead and pause it just to have a look at the latest information here. Now, when you look at this, remember that this shade of color represents flow that's coming toward the radar. The radar is located here, and these colors represent going away. So I just kind of drew a couple of arrows denoting the direction of the flow around Idalia, which I know you've already seen and know. But I want to make a point. There is a line right in through here where the velocities are measured at 0. Can you see that? It goes in both directions. The reason for that is in order to get the Doppler shift that we would need to measure and assess the wind speed and direction, you have to have a component of the flow going into or away from the beam, right in through here. So the beam leaves and goes out like that, right? So right in this area, the flow runs perpendicular to it, and therefore you don't measure a Doppler shift all along that line. But using the Doppler shift, we can make some assessments in here, and I apologize for the size of my mouse. I make it large so you can all see where I'm pointing, but we have a lot of wind here, measured probably about 8,000 feet above the surface. That's 115 to 120 miles an hour. And you can see here on the other side, we've got So this is kind of the whole southeast region where we're stitching together several of those radars, and we can watch over the last 12 hours or so where Idalia came from, where it's making landfall now, and what's going to be happening, I think, on the northern edge of this, because we've had numerous storms in this area just over the last 24 hours that have continued to saturate the ground, and now we're going to be pumping the moisture from Idalia into it. Now we're expecting the heaviest rainfall to be basically occurring right here where I'm drawing this line using the cursor. And I'll show you those rainfall totals in just a few moments, but it's important to note that Idalia is not slowing down. It's moving at a pretty good clip here. We expect it to take about, by the time we get into early Thursday morning, it should already have left the Carolina coast. So we're going to watch this all day today, really ripping across this particular area, moving pretty quickly. The latest from the National Hurricane Center at 5 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, again, 130 mile an hour winds, which made this a Category 4 strength hurricane. But all the way by early Tuesday morning, we're going to watch this Thursday morning, forgive me. It's going to be exiting this part of South Carolina. So just to get an idea on different forecast tracks, because if you remember yesterday, we had some concern that what's left of Idalia could make this turn back. Well, there's little evidence of that now. Here's the latest update from the combination of the European, the GFS, the UK Met Office, and the CMC, which is the Canadian models. If we just take it back and show you the latest runs, we can see that it's going to move quite quickly through Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, but the majority of the ensemble members now leave this system out here over the open Atlantic, with very few of them drawing anything that's left of Idalia back into Florida. So it's important just to note there was that one shift in the pattern overall. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is a storm surge. We did see 12 to 16 feet being forecast for this region. Right now is when that storm surge is trying to reach its peak. We'll get a verification of this soon. But because of the track shifting a bit farther north and a little bit west of what we were worried about yesterday, this did take some of the threat away from Tampa Bay. But as we think about this, remember that the timing of Idalia and the tidal forces has been critical at making some cases the surge worse. So we'll watch for that quite carefully. Now, as of early this morning, Florida had 116,000 people without power, mostly, of course, right in through this area. We do expect these numbers to grow and expect them to move farther to the north into Georgia and South Carolina. The map, again, is poweroutage.us. If you want to use this, it's a great resource. We'll just watch these outages continue to increase in this area as Idalia makes its move to the north. Now, as I said, ahead of this, we had some pretty heavy rain. So the last 3 days leading up to Idalia, there were several places in the path of this hurricane that did receive, better than 2 to 3 inches of rain. There's a few holes in here as well that will be getting filled in. But just before I come back to this, take note, we did have a frontal boundary that snuck through parts of the Midwest. Got some better rains in the Great Lakes area. We've had a lot of large storms roll down the front range of the Rockies, getting into Texas, Louisiana. Some of the first rain in a very long time in these areas. And then a very potent shortwave that ejected yesterday here in the Pacific Northwest, producing strong straight-line winds, hail, and just a lot of locally heavy rainfall. And I was looking at this morning on satellite as the sun was rising throughout the central part of the country here. Just wanted to wait to get a good view of Idalia and also Franklin. But I'd like to take you back to yesterday if I could real quick. Because as we were watching those two hurricanes churning here, one near the southeast and one off the coast, take a look at the frontal boundary that's sneaking right in through here, delivering some rain. Some local rainfall amounts here got quite heavy. Look at the smoke that's getting pulled into the backside of this frontal boundary. And then if you take a look, watch the Pacific Northwest, specifically Idaho here. As late in the day, that shortwave used the mountains and just popped off some very large storms, producing a lot of damaging wind, like I said, and some hail. But it's ingesting quite a bit of smoke on the backside just as the sun was setting. Okay, now that we've got that picture, because I'm going to come back to this, let's go back to Idalia and take a look at some of the forecasts. This is the latest update this morning from the 6Z GFS model run, and we're identifying this region in the model of having that 3 to possibly 6 inch rainfall total, some places here above that, well over 8 inches in total. The GFS did kind of trend more toward the European solution. So remember yesterday, the GFS was very wet farther to the north in Georgia and South Carolina. Now we can see it coming a bit farther to the south. To compare that to the latest European model run, it's very close to the same regions, although the European run is wetter in this part of South Carolina. Just take note because that was an area that was a bit drier in the last few days. But the rainfall totals are similar. A lot of 4 to 8 inch rainfall totals coming through this area. I then want to update this with the newest from the WPC. They've got a much broader area in through here of 4 to 8 inches of rainfall in South Carolina and North Carolina. And remember, leading up to this, we had been watching for some regional drought development in North Carolina. So this hurricane coming through, and dropping just a tremendous amount of water. Let's go back to the European model, and I want to flip this over from precipitation and show you surface winds. We're going to look at 10 meter max wind gusts. So this is a gust swath. So there is our 100 plus mile an hour winds on landfall, but there's a lot of 30, 40, and 50 mile an hour wind gusts expected in this region over the next 36 hours. That's what we're going to be keeping an eye on. The GFS, which has been the model I've preferred for this, shows something similar. It's a little bit faster by about 5 miles an hour, and I think that's going to be the case. So I would lean on this for your wind speed estimates out of this hurricane. So we've seen the rainfall, we've seen the winds, we've already taken a quick account of the storm surge. This is what we're expecting out of Idalia. All right. So from here, I want to back this up and show you bigger picture things. Because after this, what we're going to watch is the West Coast. So we see Idalia, Franklin, the trough that brought in the cooler air through the Great Lakes, that was the front to the south. But that's all going to change quickly as we see later on today this shortwave eject into Montana and out into the Canadian Prairie, making some storms. Now, as Idalia exits, watch the West Coast. By Thursday into Friday, we end up developing this high over low setup. And on the northern side of it, the jet stream's just screaming along, and it's going to stay pretty far to the north. And that is going to allow this larger ridge to begin to open up as we go into the end of this weekend, into this weekend. So as that occurs, what we expect to see here is a lot of heat coming through this region, very unsettled weather in the west in terms of chances for storms. And we're going to see repeated shots at getting troughing coming in the northwest as we walk our way through, that first week of September. Which means if the ridge is anchored here but keeps expanding in this direction, and there's really nothing to kick it out, because we do expect the tropics to quiet down after this, this is going to allow for some heat and dryness to move into this area with limited chances on rainfall. And the models just want to leave it there. This is all about September 11th, 12th, 13th, and you kind of get this sense that we've got flow doing something like that. Now what's changed is we have ridging here. So there's troughing on the west coast and a ridge that pops back out. Every episode of heat this summer has been telegraphed to us by what's going on over the Aleutian Islands. We just continue to see that happening. So let's break it down by going into the models. We're going to start off with the this morning's high-res NAM. So pick it up about 6 a.m. Here you can see the storm system rolling through. That's Idalia's rain. And you can see the deepest red showing you that corridor where we are expecting the heaviest rains. Watch right in through here. Now outside of that, for the rest of the country, things are pretty quiet. Some storms in New England. We have the wave that's moving here into the Pacific Northwest, dumping some rain in this part of Washington, northern Idaho, and parts of Montana. Right now, the Storm Prediction Center has not identified a large area of severe weather risk, but we just need to keep out for an eye on some of these storms into tonight. And then we see a front. This is the next short wave coming into the west. It gets locked into that high over low pattern for a while here at the end of the week. And that's going to deliver some locally heavy rain into parts of Washington, Oregon, Northern California, this whole interior section of the Northwest. And this is going to be important because there's places like the I-5 corridor here that have not measured rainfall in a very long time. So to see this moisture coming in is important just to assess the overall kind of water health. You then see as that wave dives that we start to bring in better moisture here, and we pull this also out of part of the southwest monsoon. So we just need to keep an eye in the west as that trough digs in. Our 7-day outlook looks something like this. So now we can see where the moisture is coming from here. The deeper trough in the west delivering rainfall into these areas, and this is Idalia. There is a chance for some storms in the central part of the country here, but most of this is going to be very dry for a while. From Texas all the way to the Great Lakes, this whole region is what I expect to be drier for the next 7 to 10 days. Here is the European model solution for this. We're going to use the 0Z run. We've already watched through Thursday and into Friday, so this is when the trough digs in. So this is early Friday morning, getting into Friday afternoon, evening. Here we are Saturday morning. A lot of isolated showers and storms throughout the west. And then as we work into Sunday, we're going to watch that lead wave eject. We talked about that yesterday. It's a little bit farther north this time, coming through parts of Montana, getting into Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And then we're going to see on Tuesday into Wednesday, it is possible that as that system comes up and then runs over here, that there'll be a cold front that gets left behind it. And there's the chance for bringing in a week from now storm chances through the Midwest. But that would be the first rainfall shown up in this area in a while. And just to take a look at this, let's go to the 14-day precipitation graphic. There we go. There's a lot of places in the central United States here that have not measured precipitation in the last couple of weeks, many of them much, much longer than that. So we've gone into a dry finish here for a lot of the crop in this area, and we're expecting at least another 7 to 10 days, possibly longer, of drier weather here as well. So next, let's just add it all up. This is what the European model is suggesting. Let's take you back to the beginning of the solution. So let's play this forward and just see out 1 week total rainfall amounts. That's a week out. Okay, right there, sorry. And what we've got here is that Pacific Northwest, a lot of chances for moisture. Central United States, not much. Beginning out to next Wednesday, that's when that potential wave comes through. It may bring in some rain by Thursday, but don't count on this. We've got a lot that has to happen in order to make this occur. So if we just kind of look at the same map and say, just give me the 10 days and compare it to normal, that's what you've got here. So these colors represent wetter, these represent drier. And there's a large section of the country that's left out of this flow that we don't expect to get much precip. We can back that up with some probability maps. This is your chance over the next 10 days of grabbing an inch of rain. Let's just keep an eye down here to see what it looks like for 2 inches. Of course, it's high. There's 4 inches and 8 inches. So right now the ensembles are not seeing that 8-inch amount, but there will be areas in there that pick up 4 to 8 inches of rainfall. On the drier side of this, let's go have a look at the probability of less than half of an inch. And that's the impact of that ridge that's opening up in the midsection of the country. Now the worry here is that already the soil is losing its moisture. This is partly due to crop dynamics, right? But we've got a lot going on here in the top 100 centimeters that's putting this in the lowest part of the distribution over the time period that NASA analyzes here. So this is an area that I continue to watch. We talked about it yesterday because of the drainage to the Mississippi River, which is already about 5 feet below low stage down here in Memphis. So we do not expect much rain in this area for a while, and even the new week 2 forecasts continue to keep drier risks here. The drier risks extend down to Texas and into the southwest. It's in all 3 models, so we're really getting some confidence there. If there's a spot that has better chances out there from September the 6th through the 12th of having above normal rainfall, it's going to be the Pacific Northwest. On the temperature side of this, the CPC has continued to alert us to the risk of excessive heat coming in multiple waves in this section of the country. And here's the latest update I've got from the National Digital Forecast Database. So here are today's highs. We're going to play this into Thursday and Friday. So the cooler air clears, the cloud cover clears, the heat builds back in behind it. Deeper troughs, a lot of storms here coming into the west late this week and into the weekend. So the temperatures, hundreds in Kansas, well into the 90s throughout the Midwest, upper Midwest, and northern plains, and that spreads east on Sunday, getting into Monday. So very hot conditions here coming in this first wave. That gets you out to the 5th. This would be Tuesday the 5th. Cool west, warm east, that's what that ridge is doing. We then expect it to resurge again. So there's the next 5 days. Okay, so the cooler weather leaves. Watch the heat build in while the west cools off. And then watch this. This is day 5 to 10. Now we're going to go day 10 through 15. We expect the heat to come back in a second wave into this area, meaning that through the middle of the month, we're going to be warmer than average. So I'm going to draw on this to tell you what I think most of September is going to look like. I think the heat that's coming in here is going to last well into the third week of September. I think the dryness that you saw forecast in this area lasts that long as well. But there are some indications that the pattern could make a shift well past the middle of the month, giving us a different end of the month than beginning of the month. And some of that's coming from the evidence I've got here from the MJO, which again is kind of pushing out over here in phases 4 and 5. Now thinking about that, if you look at MJO phase 4 when there's an El Nino and you're in September, we tend to get troughing that happens in this area with a blocking ridge that sits up over Canada. But this is not the kind of pattern that gets stuck and stays stuck. And the reason why I say that is there's plenty of momentum coming in from the Pacific. There's going to be flow to the south of this trough here, and we don't see a block up ahead of this in the North Atlantic. So this is a transitory pattern, meaning if we do get into phase 4, it's not as though phase 4 is the type that gives us these big high over low blocks on the coasts. What you've got in the central United States is a bit of a different scenario. So I do expect the pattern to shift toward the end of the month, that last week of the month. Until then, what you've got coming up in the next 2 weeks is on repeat. The tropics will calm down because of this too. The reason why, we're going to be putting more suppression in the upper levels of the atmosphere over that part of the tropics for a while. It's going to put a little lid on it that's going to last into the second and third week of September, but then it will start cranking again. The ocean temperature is still quite warm in here. El Nino continues to build. And what I want to stress about this is that through this entire summer, we've had very weak trade winds in this area. Now, why we care about this is because it is these trade winds that ultimately drive the monsoonal circulation that needs to start in September and October and then crank up in November. That comes right over the Amazon and delivers the moisture into Brazil. Now, the current moisture that's in this area we've been talking about is not from monsoonal flow. And the rains we've got here are starting to back off. Now, if we don't develop that strong flow to come in like this, and instead the flow comes in off of this part of the Atlantic here versus here, this area, I'll put a big D on it, is dry. So this is what the Brazilians are waiting on. And the rain that came in now, while it was, a good early shot at rain, this is not yet the full evolution of the monsoon. But there has been, and it continues to be forecast, heavy rain for southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina. And there's a long-standing drought in this area. In fact, let's go out here and just pull this up real quick. If we look up GRACE, this is NASA GRACE data. And South America, and let's go to there we go. Look how dry things are down here on the August 28th data. So watch it carefully with me. We'll keep an eye on South America as they are now just, 16 days away from starting their planting if they can. It'll all depend on the monsoon. I'll bring you up to speed on that every day until they get going, and then we'll watch their weather carefully. I appreciate your attention. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks.